Good. Okay. Um, so welcome everyone. My name is Nancy Powell. I am a member of West Newbury WOW Native. Newbury WOW Native is a group of residents from West Newbury and adjacent towns passionate about promoting native plants, pollinators, wildlife-friendly gardening, and controlling invasive plants. We believe that preservation of natural biodiversity is best done one yard at a time, and we work to educate and empower every gardener and landowner to preserve and restore native habitat in their own backyards. We want to thank the West Newbury Library for co-sponsoring this event with us tonight and letting us use their Zoom account. Our guest speaker tonight is Marianne DiBlas, who will be
Yep.
speaking to us on the topic of green burials. We have a very high registration number tonight, over 90 people. So we'll see how many of them end up joining us. But there's obviously a lot of interest in this topic. Some of you may be wondering what a native gardening group has to do with green burials. I think at our core, WOW and Native is about helping people connect to nature. And there is nothing more natural than returning our bodies to the earth to become one with the ecosystems that have sustained us in life. So I first learned about natural burials in college when I read that Edward Abbey, a noted author and environmentalist out west, asked his friends to bury him in a sleeping bag in the desert that he loved. I don't know that that was completely legal when he did it, but luckily the green burial movement has come a long way since then, and we're looking forward to learning about that. Before we start, there's just a couple of Zoom logistics I want to go over. I think, if you're just joining us now, this presentation is getting recorded for later, and we will also record the question and answer session because there's really good information that can come out of that. While Marianne is presenting, we ask that you mute yourself and turn off your cameras if it is on. If you have any questions, go ahead and enter them in the chat. If it's a clarifying question, we will ask, Carol and I will be monitoring that, and we will post a question to Marianne. Otherwise, we'll wait till after the presentation to do the Q&A session. Are you guys still hearing me okay? Okay, good.
Yes.
So we can stay around for a little bit for questions and answers. And so but go ahead and put them in the chat so that you don't forget. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carol Decker, who will introduce Marianne.
Thanks, Nancy. I must say I'm really excited to hear tonight's presentation on green burials. It's a topic we need to understand. We need to talk about it as an alternative to conventional burials because it is gentler on the environment. And as it states on the green burial website, quote, it restores death to its rightful place in the cycle of life. I really like that quote. So I am very pleased to introduce Marianne tonight. She's a member and volunteer of the Green Burial Massachusetts Speakers Bureau. Marianne is passionate about living in harmony with nature and spreading awareness about the simplicity of green burial as a way to both nourish the earth and rest in its gentle embrace after death. So welcome, Marianne.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Nancy. It's really a real pleasure to see you, to be here with all of you. And can everybody see the slides? Well, I
Yes.
assume that you'll see the slides unless I hear otherwise. Yeah, so green burial this evening. And just to give you a little bit of who I'm representing, I am on the Speaker Bureau for Green Burial Massachusetts, and they are located out in Western Mass. And they have been operating as a nonprofit, completely volunteer-led for over 10 years. And they are just an unbelievably dedicated knowledgeable group of individuals and volunteers who are part of this organization. And we do have a member of the Green Burial Massachusetts board on the call tonight, Candace Curry, and she'll be kind of joining in with some of the Q&A as well. So what Green Burial Massachusetts does is they primarily provide education, which is what we're doing here tonight, present at libraries, senior centers, religious organizations, all sorts of places to try to spread the word about green burial. And they do advocacy, trying to advocate with legislation, et cetera, and then consultation with towns and cities and who are looking to add green burial and looking into green burial and how to add it into their cemeteries that they have or to start a new cemetery, green burial cemetery. So they're a busy group. And one of their more recent focuses is working to establish the first conservation cemetery in Massachusetts, and we will get into that as one of the kind of green burial options. And they were established in 2019 as a 501c3, primarily to support that conservation cemetery effort. Our agenda tonight is to start with just setting some context of a historical view. It will be U.S. centric, in the U.S. And then we'll have a lot of talk about like what is green burial, what's not green burial, why you might choose green burial, and what types of cemeteries. There are different types of cemeteries out there, so we'll talk about that. And then we will leave time at the end for question and answers. And just to reinforce what was already shared with you by Nancy, is just post your questions in the chat, and we'll leave primarily the Q&A till the end. So just to kind of setting the context here, back prior to 1860, caring for the dead and waking the dead and our loved ones was really handled by family, close relatives, neighbors, church members. It was a very intimate experience with individuals who knew the loved one. And I don't know about you, but my great-grandfather was waked in the living room of his home. And that was how it was done until it started to shift in the 1860s. And that was the rise of the funeral parlor industry, which we all are very familiar with. So what happened in 1860? Well, surgeons on the battlefield. It was really the Civil War that happened, because what happened in the Civil War is that there were many soldiers that were unfortunately dying by the thousands on the battlefield. And these tents were set up for these surgeons to be tending to the wounded right on the battlefield. And of course, some of them did not make it, they were not healed. And so they had a lot of people that had died. And some of those wanted to be shipped home to their families up north, and they would embalm them or preserve them with arsenic at the time, very rudimentary embalming, so that they could make the trip up, or they were just or they until they could get to them to bury them locally where they were. And then it was in April of 1865 when President Lincoln was assassinated, and his body was put on a train and sent from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Illinois, in a very slow traveling train. I think it was only 20 miles an hour. And the public would come and they would view the train as it went by. And so that really is what popularized embalming, so to speak, because they had to embalm him to take him on this trip. and people said, well, if it's good enough for the president, it's good enough for me. So that was really when things started with the funeral parlors, and also just the industrial era as well happened, and people were living in smaller apartments, and there was just the lifestyle was changing. And so the funeral industry and outsourcing to a professional was happening. And then another shift that happened was in 1930. Wilbur Haas developed the what we know now as this concrete vault, which you'll see on the left, and then the vault goes into the ground. The casket goes into the vault, and then there's a cover on top of it. And that steel structure is to lower the vault and then the casket into the vault. So that really changed things, and they were, as you'll hear more about, that vault, it was really became very popular with what we most people know of as lawn cemeteries, where they're nice green lawns, and you have big lawn mowers that go over the cemetery plots, etc. And so a lot of the vaults were useful for, or they're beneficial, I guess, for mowing the lawn to for lawn maintenance. And it does prevent cave-ins, or reduces, it doesn't prevent, it does reduce cave-ins from happening. And then in 1998, we returned, green burial returned back to starting in popularity in Ramsey Creek, South Carolina. And that is on the right. So you can see the difference with that cemetery plot. It's a hole in the ground. There's no vault, and there's just some slats across that you lay the body on before you lower it into the ground. But again, very much more natural. Green burial since that time has been growing. Well, this particular slide shows since 2015, and you could see the sharp incline of green burials and the growth of green burials. And the blue line is US and Canada, the green is just the US, and then in New England is the red. And so, but the same trajectory from all across Canada, US, and in New England, which is why many of you are here today. Uh, why might somebody choose green burial? So some of the reasons are that if you're an environmentalist, and this is something that is near and dear to your heart, or if you're a member of West Newbury Wild and Native, then of course you'll be caring about native. You care about the earth. You care about living life in alignment with your values, and an end of life. And what do you do with your body, and how you want to live in harmony with nature. So, and significantly reduces the carbon footprint, and it nourishes the earth. Actually, your bodies nourish the earth. We go back and we nourish it. And then also there are religious reasons. You might want to personalize the ceremony to a greater degree. You're able to do that because, again, natural or green burial is kind of returning to that model of family, friends, loved ones, all gathering around and being more participatory in the process. It's not necessarily as outsourced to professionals in the industry, and it lends itself. It most usually is more affordable, and all of the above. And if we were in person, I would open it up and say, are there other reasons? But these are usually the ones that people select and they talk about. Oh, a big question. What is green burial anyway? I guess you can really say that ultimately, if you remember nothing else about this presentation, green burial is that everything that goes into the ground is biodegradable. That's the really short answer to that question. There's no embalming or chemicals used to preserve the body. There's no vault, as we've already seen. You're just going right directly into the earth. There are containers, which we call containers as opposed to a casket. And those are, we'll get into that. Well, I'll show you some examples of some biodegradable containers in just a minute. And then if you see on the right, there's a bed with the body is laying on top of a bed of organic nutrients and materials, which help with the decomposition process, and again help with returning a body to the earth in a more natural way. And simpler, and once again, participation with family and friends. But really, everything that goes into the ground is biodegradable. It's healthy for the earth. And here are some biodegradable containers. In the upper left-hand corner, that is a simple pine box. And when you are using a pine box, there are no nails, there's no varnish, there's everything that is on that pine box is again biodegradable. So it's very, very simple, although it can be decorated and it can be carved if you would like, but not varnished and nothing unnatural. And in the top right-hand corner is a cardboard container. And there's a organization in Arlington, Massachusetts, which I think they were reimagined and now they're the Morning Dove store. Um, but they're in Arlington. And also, just as an aside, you can buy a cardboard container from Green Burial, Massachusetts, and half of the proceeds will go as a tax-deductible donation to Green Burial, Massachusetts. So that's another option to obtain a cardboard container. People like cardboard containers because sometimes people will draw on them, they'll write messages on them. They're very easy to personalize for, especially if you have artistic people or in your life and you want to decorate that. So that's an option with a popular reason why people go with a cardboard container. In the bottom left, we have a wicker container. And on the right, bottom right, is just a shroud, a simple shroud. And a shroud would be anything, again, biodegradable, cotton, wool, muslin. So anything kind of a natural material. If you have a favorite blanket or a quilt, as long as it's all cotton, you can be wrapped in that. And people do that as well. I don't know, again, like the sleeping bag. The idea was there. I don't know if that's not biodegradable though. At least most of the sleeping bags that I know of. So what are these kind of ways family and friends can get involved? And again, this list is these are just some ideas. It depends on the cemetery, what their policies are. So you do need to coordinate with the cemetery and where you're burying your loved one. But people, they can it they can lower it into the ground, what you're seeing on the right-hand side. Sometimes that's not an option, but you can, put shovelfuls of dirt over the grave. That's a common thing that people will do. They place flowers, as you'll see on that picture. They place flowers on top of the container, and then it's a time also for rituals of people singing songs, reading prayers, reflections. It can be very, very personalized. It really lends itself to that very naturally. And then instead of a headstone, you would place a natural marker, like maybe a stone or some other natural marker that to indicate where that grave is. So cost for green burial, it varies widely. Um, it depends on all these different types of these aspects, these elements. It's going to be more expensive if you're in a city or an urban area as opposed to, maybe out in Western Mass where it's a little bit more rural. It also depends a lot on the type of cemetery. We were just talking before this call that Mount Auburn has green burial. They do green burials. Mount Auburn is also a private cemetery. So I have not personally looked into it, but gray sites can be $20,000 or maybe even more. So that's a private cemetery. Your municipal town cemeteries will be less expensive. And then there are also religious cemeteries. Like, for example, out in Sharon, there's a Jewish cemetery that is just all green burial. Just as an aside, religious faith, faiths will often do a green burial. Well, Judaism and Islam, they have been doing green natural burial as part of their faith tradition. So that has been happening for a very long time, and they've had dedicated cemeteries sometimes for that reason. It also, the cost depends on what type of professional services you hire. You can have all sorts of different services, or you can do it yourself. Do-it-yourselfers do like green burial. That's another way that people like to be involved in all the details and in the coordination of the ceremony. And then, of course, the containers do vary. Where are you doing a memorial service? Are you having an officiant? Are you doing catering? There's all sorts of factors. So in general, green burials will cost anywhere from 2,600 to 8,000, or a little bit more. But again, there's a lot of different factors to take into consideration. But generally much less expensive than a conventional burial because there isn't the vault, there isn't a casket, there isn't the embalming fees. And public safety, this was really something that people were asking about a lot during COVID. Is it safe to bury a body who had had COVID into the ground? And the CDC and the Center for Infectious Disease has determined that once the body dies, all the pathogens, all the microorganisms, all that is alive in the body also dies. And there's really very no risk of the body transmitting infectious disease into the ground. And just, I mean, you can think about it this way too, because our septic systems or our sanitary systems are based on the premise that the soil will filter all the pathogens, and there's nothing better that filters out what is not good for the earth than the soil itself. So now we're going to move into the different cemetery settings. So if you've had any questions about anything about green burial and what it is, up until that point, this is a good time to make a note of any of your questions. Because now we're going to move into different types of cemetery settings. So on the left, you'll see what we call a more conventional cemetery with headstones, and it's a lawn cemetery, as you can see. And then on the right is a green or a natural cemetery. And if you can see this, I don't know if you can see you can see my cursor, this little mound right here. That is actually a burial site with a body that has just been buried, and the dirt is mounded on top of the body so that as the body decomposes and everything settles, then it is flat, it is flush with the rest of the land. But so there's a very big difference you can see between the two types of cemeteries visually, as well as underneath the ground as well. So a conventional cemetery, the graves are dug about 6 feet deep to the bottom. Part of that is because of the vault, the vault that is put into the ground, and then there's the casket and the cover and dirt on top of that. So they're dug deep into the ground. And these headstones, they come from a long distance, many of them from across overseas to come. So it is not environmentally friendly. Again, it contributes to a high carbon footprint of a conventional burial. And again, the body is typically embalmed. Um, and the casket itself it's not a natural material. It's either steel, it's copper, sometimes it's hardwood, but generally it's either steel or copper with the inside cushions and fabric, etc., also not degradable. And the vault itself is usually concrete. It also can be metal or plastic. And then for lawn cemeteries, they are maintained and cared for their visual appearance. You know, we don't want weeds, they don't want all these things growing that are growing naturally in the land, which could be, so they get rid of all of that by using pesticides. And just as little myth buster here, for those of you who are wondering if embalming in vaults are actually required, in Massachusetts, embalming is not legally required. It is for funeral homes. That's their policy for families who are viewing the body. So that is a funeral home policy. And it does preserve the body for up to 2 weeks so that you have time to plan a memorial service and a wake and all of that. But it is not required. And also, vaults are not legally required. Once again, it's usually for the policy of the lawn cemeteries for maintaining the lawns and keeping them in good condition for the heavy equipment that they use. So I just want to, sometimes people ask that. So those are myths. We don't have that in Massachusetts. Just to give you a little bit of perspective on the environmental impacts, which is really important to this group in particular, 40 in the US, it's estimated, you can read all these statistics of how many gallons of embalming fluid or chemical preservatives that we put into the earth, whether or not it leaks out or not through the casket in the vault. It probably does. It just will take a long time. But we're still using all these chemicals. There's concrete, steel, copper. I mean, just tons and tons and tons of non of materials that will not biodegrade. So that's the environmental impact of what we're doing in the US. Now shifting to green burial characteristics. So in a contrast to 6 feet deep, the grave depth of a green burial is 3 to 4 feet. And that is because that is at the microbiome level, so that the body and the microbiomes in the earth will actually decompose the body and interact with the body. So that's why that depth is an ideal depth. It's also low enough into the ground so that animals won't smell or anything. So it's low enough to keep it protected, uh, but deep enough so that the microbiomes will help with the body decomposition. Again, the cemetery that you're at will have their own policies on what type of grave marker that you can have. It can either a stone or sometimes flat, sometimes no marker. But again, that is really up to the policy of the cemetery that or wherever you're burying your loved one or yourself at some point. Native plants, yay. It's all natural, native plants only. Um, It's non-toxic, biodegradable. We've covered that before. Limited equipment. This particular cemetery in Westford, they only this is just before they mowed the lawn. This photo was taken. They only do it twice a year to prevent trees from growing. But it's really not, it is not mowed on a regular basis. It's left to just be natural. No, there are three types of green burial cemeteries. One is a hybrid cemetery, and that is an example is the Pine Grove Cemetery in Westford. You'll see in the foreground that is the green burial section of the cemetery. And in the background, you'll see that it's a conventional cemetery. So that lawn cemetery. That's fairly common in this area. And and then a natural cemetery, and we'll go over all what these all are individually in upcoming slides, but that is fully natural. There is no conventional cemetery in there involved, and that's out in Gill, Mass. And then in Maine, there's a conservation cemetery, and you'll see that in this that in the US, hybrid cemeteries, I believe that's in the US. I'm actually not 100% sure. I believe I think, or it might be Massachusetts. No, it's the US. I'm sorry, it's the US. Has to be. Um, so there are 366 as of November of last year. And then there are natural cemeteries, and conservation is less. There are fewer of those as we go through. But in this area, especially hybrid cemeteries are the most common. So a hybrid cemetery, it was what I was explaining before. They have both the green burial section either within as part of a section of the cemetery or it's next to it, but it's in an existing cemetery. And just this this marker, I selected this photo because this marker, it's what they call a communal marker. So the individual graves at this particular green burial section does not have individual markers. Instead, they have a communal marker, so they identify who is buried in this section, and then they have little tags with numbers on them so that you'll know where the green burials, where the burial plot is for for each individual. And then on the right, they can also be intermingled with existing conventional cemetery plots. This on the right-hand side happens to be Mount Auburn Cemetery, which is an older cemetery, so that they will be intermingling green burial amongst amongst other conventional cemetery burials. And a natural burial ground is one that is 100% fully dedicated to sustainable practices. So on the entire cemetery, they prohibit vaults, grave liners, embalmed bodies, and everything is natural. It's all what, and you'll see an example of a natural marker as in that middle photo. And a conservation burial ground is it's an established partnership between a land trust and a conservation organization. And this one particular one happens to be in Ohio, as an example, in Ohio. But they're really there to, a conservation burial ground preserves the land, and the fees for the burials are actually a revenue stream, and they go towards uh, the land trust, the conservation land, to restore it. So it's used for recreation, it's used for the natural, the wildlife. So it actually goes to right back into the sustaining of the land. And as I said earlier, Green Burial, Massachusetts is searching right now for conservation cemetery in the Massachusetts area. They're looking all the way from Worcester to the Berkshires. And this is just a little bit more about what a conservation cemetery, it's a combination of using this land. It's both for the wildlife and for the earth, and it's also for the people and for recreation. And it becomes a real sanctuary that people can go and not just to be with their loved ones, but to actually enjoy nature. And if you're want to search for a cemetery in your area to find out which cemeteries might have a green burial section or be a green burial cemetery, Green Burial Massachusetts has a database. The website is there, and you can just go to Green Burial Massachusetts, and and has a tab for the searchable database, and you can search by county, by town, and it'll indicate which cemeteries have a green burial section, what type of cemetery it is. This is updated by volunteers who make phone calls to different cemeteries and inquire what their status is for green cemetery. Sometimes they're in the process of it, and sometimes they've completed, and then we update the cemetery database accordingly. And just a little shout out in case you're interested in volunteering for Green Burial, Massachusetts. They are always looking for volunteers to make phone calls to cemeteries to keep this database updated. So just keep that in mind if you're looking for a volunteer opportunity. And what do you do if you can't find a green burial in your area? So, um, if it's a lawn cemetery, a conventional cemetery, they will probably require a vault, but you can ask them to invert the vault so that the bottom is so it's tipped upside down. So the bottom becomes the top, and then the bottom of the vault is open. And so that the body can be placed in and it's right against the earth. It'll still be 6 feet deep, but it'll be right against the earth, directly on the earth. So that is something. And then the bottom of the vault becomes the cover, which the cemetery for lawn maintenance will that will meet their requirements or their preferences for lawn maintenance. Again, embalming is not required by law, so you can skip that and you can save the money for that. And you don't have to use the $5,000 plus caskets that the funeral parlor will show you. You can buy a biodegradable container, which is much less expensive and much healthier for the environment. So those are some things that you can look into if you can't find green burial. You can talk to your local cemetery. So again, we're going to kind of switch topics again. If you had any questions about that previous section, just make note of them in the chat, because now we're going to move into some what is not green burial. Cremation by fire. So a lot of people do, cremation is very popular, has increased in popularity to a great degree. And in some ways, in one particular way, it is more earth friendly because it uses a much smaller footprint, and there's no casket, there's no vault, etc. However, it is not as environmentally friendly as many people are under the impression, because the furnace that is used, which is called a retort, if you've ever heard that, is heated up to 1400 to 1700 degrees Fahrenheit for anywhere up to 4 hours. That is a long time. That's a high, huge carbon footprint. And that heat in the fire is releasing toxins into the air and into the atmosphere. So just one cremation releases 535 pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere, which is like driving your car over 600 miles. So when we think about that, that just gives you a little bit of context for how much energy is being used. And then in 2021, around 2 million cremations happen, and that's the equivalent of 2,549 round trips to the moon. It's a huge amount of energy. And then if a lot of, when you have the remains, the cremated remains, many times people want to bury the remains into the earth, maybe near a tree or near a special area that was meaningful. But there's a very high pH and salt content to the cremated remains, which is not healthy for plants. So those are just kind of some little known information about cremation. And then there's alkaline hydrolysis, which is water cremation, that is not available right now in Massachusetts. There are 29 states as of September 2023 where it's legal. However, not all of those have the equipment to actually do it. So even though it's legal, you may or may not be able to actually do it because they don't have the equipment yet. But it does use a lot less energy than fire cremation. And essentially what it does is it liquefies your tissues, and it just in the alkaline liquid that remains is safe, and it's not it's safe to be put into earth because it removes all the toxins. And then another option, which again is not available in Massachusetts, but there has been proposed legislation both for the water cremation and the human composting that is in legislation. It's been proposed for a while, and it's kind of slow going, so I think it has stalled. It is stalled, and whether or not it's going to be reintroduced is under discussion. But natural organic reduction is legal in 13 states, and you cover the bottle. That is actually a real, like, I think the owner of this recompost in Washington in there, but he's just an example. But you cover the body with plant material and you turn the body over and it naturally decomposes over the course of 8 to 12 weeks. And then you end up with a small truckload of compost, which you can use to for your plants, or you can use it as compost like you would any compost. But again, that's not available. Those are not green burial, and they're not available in Massachusetts currently. So people on this call may be very interested in being part of the green burial movement to promote and to help increase the number of green burial sites in Massachusetts. There is a handout that I have sent to Nancy and that she will be sending out along with the recording. It's a handout of resources, and on the back of that is a list of 10 things that you can say or do to promote green burial locally in your area. Along with the handout with the resources, there will be a green burial brochure and a Green Burial Massachusetts frequently asked questions brochure. So you'll be receiving all of those handouts as well. You can also just call your cemetery. It depends if there may be a cemetery advisory committee, or it may be whoever's involved with making decisions about the cemetery. Ask them if they have green burial. The more questions they ask, the more responsive they are to people in meeting the needs in the community. And so you can advocate for green burial. I know my local town here in Winchester, myself and another individual, we've been advocating for green burial at our conventional cemetery for a couple of years now, and we are making progress. They have approved looking into it, investigating it, and they have identified a site. So they're moving along, not as quickly as we want them to, but they're moving along. But it really happened because of interest from individuals in the community requesting it and generating interest from other community members. You can attend cemetery meetings. You can share your interest. You can share information with them. And you can be a volunteer on your cemetery commission if there's a cemetery commission in your town. That's a great way to have some real authority and influence on the policies and of the cemetery. And then just to let you know, not all funeral homes, if you want a funeral home involved, which you probably do, and at some point in the green burial in the process, not all of them do green burials, so you'll want to do your research a little bit ahead of time and contact your funeral parlor and see if they do green burial so that you know who you want to work with. And then spreading the words with others. Talk about it. Just talk about green burial because death is really a taboo topic. You'd be surprised though when you bring it up. People are really interested and they're curious. What is green burial? So you can just simply say to somebody, "Hey, I went to a green burial presentation and I learned so much." Well, really? What's green burial? And one of the things that you can tell them is the number one thing you learned in this presentation, that everything that goes into the ground is biodegradable. So, but talk about it. People are really interested. You'd be surprised. Even my brother, who I would never expect to be interested, really was. And here are some additional resources. And all of the resources listed on this page will be in the handout that will be going out to you. So you don't have to, write down notes and take notes. But the Green Burial Council is They're the actual certification organization in the United States for green cemeteries, and they do a lot of publications. They are a wealth of information. So their website is chock-a-block full of information. And then there's the Conservation Burial Cemetery Project in the Alliance. And this is an organization that's really great to know about is the Funeral Consumers Alliance. They do education and legislation advocacy, but they are really broader than just broad cemetery. It's really about the whole funeral industry, the end of life process. They're a great organization for helping people guide them through the whole end of life process. And the New Hampshire funeral resource, the New Hampshire site. They again are very into green burial. A lot of great information on that website. If you want some to know more about containers and shrouds and all sorts of other types of environmentally friendly containers, there's a website for that. And if you want to do home funeral and then recompose. Actually, that's my error. That should not be on there because that's not burial. That's the uh, human composting uh, website that I said is not green burial. So I will take that out for the next time I do this presentation. And a couple of resources, some books. The books are also mentioned on that resource handout. Terrific books to just get more deep into green burial. And this is contact information for Green Burial, Massachusetts. And I want to say thank you all for the presentation. And now we will move into Q&A. And just to let you know, if your question that you've asked is not answered, or if you think a question after this presentation, or you want more information, you can email Green Burial Massachusetts at that email address. And also, like I said, the Green Burial Council website is full of really, they're the gold standard of green burial in the US. So they have a lot of information. And with that, do you want me to just leave this slide up or do you want me to stop sharing?
Why don't we leave it up for a little bit and then maybe
Okay.
we can stop sharing in about 2 minutes while people
Okay.
take it down. And Candace has been very busy in the chat answering some of the questions that's been posted, but it might be a good idea to kind of read some of those aloud. So Candace, I don't know if you want to do that or I can or Carol can.
And just a reminder for those who might have joined late after the beginning, Candace Curry is on the board of Green Burial, Massachusetts.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Marianne, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So some people, yes, I did try to answer a few of these questions, and I forgot that the presentation included a slide of the cemetery database. So that was great. One of the questions was about the cemetery database, and definitely we would love your help. So if you're interested in calling your cemetery and finding out more information, give us a shout out at info@greenburial.org and we can set you up to do that. And let's see, there's also some questions about, can you be buried in the woods or a garden and not an official cemetery? And in Massachusetts, you want to be buried in a cemetery with your body. And it is possible, though, to be buried in your backyard, for example, but you have to get the approval of your local board of health, as well as the regional DEP office. They're the people who sign off on home burial, it's called. And technically, you also have to plot that on your deed of your house on a map, so people know exactly where that thing is. And it used to be up for argument, let's say, that you didn't have to have a cemetery corporation if you were having a home burial. However, most recently, the state public health department and the DEP office have agreed that you really should be creating a 501c13 for even a home burial ground. And so that is the IRS designated private nonprofit cemetery. And if you're doing that, you're also supposed to have a board of directors so that you're creating something forever. A cemetery is forever. And so once you sell your property, the descendants of the people who are buried there might like to get onto your property to visit those people who are buried there. So home burial can be tricky. So you need to work with your local health department and DEP to make that happen. Yeah, it gets more complicated the more I talk about it. And let's see. Oh yeah, somebody was asking about the smell of the decaying body dealt with at burial. So in speaking to a wildlife biologist, their description is, we just don't taste good enough and we don't have enough meat on us for a critter to dig down 3.5, 4 feet to go for us. So it's more energy for them to dig it up than they would get from our bodies. So, and once you've covered the body up with the 3.5 feet, with the soil, at least 24 inches of soil over the body, they're just not going to go for it.
And Candace, can you talk a little bit about, I think the question about the smell might also be kind of, during that interim period before burial and at the service itself. I think you had a note in there about how to keep it, but are there services,
Yeah.
are there people that will also like keep the body for you, or is that something that most people that does green burials, is that something you do at home?
So, the funeral director, if you have a funeral director who, let's say, is happy to work with a family, the funeral director might even offer a space in their funeral home where the family members can go and help wash the body and anoint the body, using aromatic oils, lavender oils. And I have to confess, I'm not a death doula, so this is not something I do, but it often happens within the green burial realm of, so that the body can be prepared. The body can actually then be waked at home. So the body could go back to the home, to your home parlor, the living room, the bedroom, someplace in the summertime where you want to have an air conditioner on in the room to keep the body cool. And typically, once you start hitting 3 days, that's time to get the body into the ground, because even keeping it cool, the body will start to decay. Even when the body is embalmed with the formalin prepared embalming fluid, it's not protecting the body forever. The body is still going to decay, because that's what we do. We decay. We are designed to decay. So you want to get the body in the ground to promote decay, basically. And I don't know that I answered that properly for everybody. And the Techni ice, that was the other question. It used to be people would use dry ice to help keep the body cool, and it's around the trunk where you want to keep the body particularly cool. And dry ice can be difficult. It can actually burn you. So there's a new product, relatively new product called Techni ice, which is one of those types of things that you just crack it and it puffs up a little bit and gets cold. And you can put that on the trunk of the body to help keep the body cool. And so even if it's winter You might still want to use the techni-eyes and also maybe have the body near a window, and you can have the window open for some length of time so that you can have that waking period of time, that place where people, friends, and family can come to visit the body. And I say that because my understanding, at least out here in the Berkshires and talking to some funeral directors, the Board of Health has told them that if they want to have a public viewing of somebody's body, they have to do the embalming. So if you want to have a viewing at your home, you don't have to do embalming. That's my understanding of how all of that works. It's a little complicated at times.
Yeah, so I think, since we do have some good community resources on, it might be a good time to kind of talk about some of the resources or cemeteries that's in West Newbury. My understanding is there are some cemeteries in West Newbury. I don't know a lot about it. I don't know if they're all historical or if some of them are still open, and kind of what is the current status of the cemetery. I think some of our participants might be able to answer. Go ahead and mute yourself. And while we kind of queue them up on that, we do have a question from Annie and Locke that, on a farm or in people's own backyards, they are allowed to bury farm animals and dogs and pets. Why are humans treated so differently?
I don't have an answer to that question. Marianne, do you have any thoughts on that question?
I don't. I would check with the Board of Health though to ask them, what's the difference between a human and an animal?
Well, it sounds like maybe state regulations.
Well, or is it just cultural, right? I know horses and cows can just be put into a giant dung pile, and within weeks, everything has disappeared. Um, I, I think it's just cultural and religious.
Is there anybody online that can kind of talk to the cemeteries in town? Paul, I don't know if you are involved in that or if that's kind of more the historical society. Okay, I guess we'll have to research that question a little bit more. We do have another question in the chat, which is that is green burial typically something that needs to be planned ahead of time? If someone dies suddenly, and funeral plans are not made in advance, is it difficult to kind of get everything together within the time frame that's required?
I'm happy to answer that question if you'd like.
That'd be great. Thanks, Candace.
Yeah, one of the saddest things, Greenville, Massachusetts has a telephone, and we often get calls about my husband is in hospice, he wants a green burial, what can we do? And one of us will check the database and we'll discover, whoops, that town doesn't seem to have green burial, or we don't even know if if the town has even thought about green burial yet. And we'll look for the closest cemetery. And unfortunately, in your part of Massachusetts, I'm not sure that there's a whole lot happening in this local cemeteries with green burial there. So sometimes the closest place might be Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge. So not only is it, say, 40 miles away, 30 miles away, but Mount Auburn is the most expensive cemetery in Massachusetts and almost across the country. And so definitely green burial has to be planned ahead. And if you want it to happen in West Newbury, you need to start making that happen now, because sometimes it could take a year or two to get things going. For example, Marianne showed you slides from Westford, Massachusetts. It did take 2 years for Westford to get that going. They had to change bylaws. It had to be approved at a town meeting. And then they started to, the place where they wanted to do burials, and a butter complained about the burials in a wooded section. So then they had to change up their location of in the actual cemetery of where they were going to do the burials. So this often does not happen overnight. And what's interesting is that at some point in time, bylaws for the cemetery were changed that required the implementation of those vaults and these cement boxes that are called grave liners. So all the cemeteries started saying in the 1940s to the 1980s, they all changed their bylaws to say, we have to have vaults and grave liners. And so for some reason they changed it. And I believe it was primarily to keep the lawn flat so it was easier to mow. So now with this switch back to green burial and going back to nature, the bylaws are changing again to remove that requirement for the vault and the grave liner. So that's what is important, to get everybody involved in their local commissions or their local cemeteries to be able to change those bylaws and allow green burial again. And you need to work with the people who are also digging the graves. They're often the ones who have been doing it like this with grave liners and vaults for 30 years. But you don't have to keep doing it that way. But it will take a village to make the changes happen.
So it sounds like that in West Newbury, all the cemeteries are private that are accepting bodies still. The town-owned cemeteries are all historic and no longer active. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see, to check to see if there is any bylaws in West Newbury or your towns requiring, like that would prevent, I guess, working with the cemetery to convert it into a green burial.
Yes. So what's interesting about private cemeteries, you don't have your cemetery commission. You'll have some type of board of directors, most likely. And sometimes even the board of directors is no longer around, depending on how old the cemeteries are. So there might be some cemeteries in town that could be brought back to life. Maybe there's still space. Maybe there's an area in some of those older cemeteries that could allow for green burial. In fact, maybe they never vaulted burials. So definitely check out those private cemeteries in town, because the other thing we also understand is people like to be buried near where they have lived their lives. So telling somebody to drive 30 miles to go to Mount Auburn Cemetery is not a satisfying answer to give somebody. They really want to be buried near where they lived.
Right.
And just to add one other aspect of cemeteries is a lot of times municipal cemeteries will have a residency requirement so that
Yes.
you need to have lived in the town for at least 7 years. Doesn't necessarily, most towns, it doesn't have to be currently, like if you moved, but as long as you've lived there for 7 years, um, or or they can be open. Westford Cemetery was initially open. They just charged a little extra if you weren't a resident, but now their requirement is you need to be a resident.
Mhm.
So that because space limitations in this part of New England, of Massachusetts, the Newbury, West Newbury, this area, space is very, very limited. And so they're all trying to do their best to meet the needs, and their first priority is the the town, serve the community and the residents of the town. So you do need to do your homework.
Yeah. We have another question in chat. Is there any legislation being considered to make green burials more common? And is this something that the Green Burials Massachusetts is lobbying for?
Um, it already is legal in Massachusetts. So it's really just the cemeteries working at the local level at the cemetery to change the cemetery bylaws, which in a private cemetery, it's the board of directors who can change a bylaw. So there's no need for any actual lobbying related to doing green burial.
Can you talk a little bit more about the health agent's role in approving green burial cemeteries? Is there additional process if it's already a cemetery?
Um, it's my understanding is if a cemetery has already been in use, especially if it was a cemetery that had unvaulted burials in it from its inception, let's say it was 1900, there are probably already other green burials in that cemetery. So by not using the vault or the grave liner, it shouldn't require additional health agent or health department approvals. Perhaps if you're opening up a separate section, like you have a couple acres that maybe you want to, it's a wooded section right now, and maybe you want to design a woodland path through it, and you can do burials off the sides of the path. We have cemeteries out in Western Mass that are doing that right now. It's you might want to work with the Board of Health just to confirm the soils. And so that means potentially digging a 10-foot hole in the ground and seeing how well where the water table is. So the Board of Health might want to know about that if you're opening up a new section of the cemetery. And primarily it's a courtesy working with the Board of Health, but it's definitely a good thing to do. And that reminds me, we had a slide about public health. And basically, when our bodies die, the pathogen die with us. But there can be exceptions. Ebola is one of those exceptions. COVID initially was. The Green Burial Council was getting phone calls from natural cemeteries, and the phone calls went like this: I just received a body in a body bag. This person died from COVID. I'm not supposed to be putting plastic in my natural burial ground. And what should I do? And the answer was, don't touch the body, leave the body in the body bag and bury that body. This person wanted the green burial. This is as green as you can get for that person. We don't yet know what COVID is. We're putting them in the ground the way they want it to be in the ground. And the plastic will eventually decay, but it won't decompose. So if there's some major epidemic like COVID or like Ebola that hits us in the United States, the health department's going to know about that. And so cemeteries need to make sure that they're working with the health department to keep things proper and healthy for the living. And when you create the new cemetery or a new section within the cemetery, the reason why your Department of Environmental Protection is involved is they keep track of all of the public wells, and so where we get our public water supply. If West Newbury still is on private water supplies, then the Board of Health also gets involved with that and having a buffer zone around wells so that you can't do burials within a certain number of feet private well. So that's why the Board of Health is really important for establishing the proper location, looking at all the soils, and making sure you're abiding by wetlands regulations at all, which is also part of the DEP and your local conservation commission gets involved as well. So, there's many moving parts to establish where a cemetery can be.
Okay. And it sounds like we have confirmation that all of the West Newbury burial grounds are over 100 years old. I'm assuming that's both all private and the public ones
Yes.
are over 100 years old.
You're
Oh.
assuming what? I'm sorry?
Oh, it's the both the private and the town-owned ones are over 100 years
Uh-huh.
old.
Yeah, well, that would make sense given it's West Newbury. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't see any more questions in the chat. Anybody else have, oh, hold on, one new one. Okay, question just came in. Is it possible to build a land use partnership um, in southern New England like they have in Maine with the conservation cemetery? So it sounds like you guys are working in one, but it's more in kind of Western Mass. Is there any efforts in Northeast Mass?
Um, Not to my knowledge right now. Somebody in Essex used to be very involved in trying to find property that could be a conservation cemetery, although I don't remember if it might have been is there an Essex Land Trust? I can't
There's
remember.
there's a green bell. There's a Essex County green bell.
Oh, yeah. So it might have been a group from that group that was looking for something. Um, and in southeastern Massachusetts, there is another group, sort of a sister organization of ours called, let me give you the exact name, Returning to Our Roots.org. And they are looking for a land and looking to partner with a land trust. In Western Massachusetts, Greenboro, Massachusetts has established a relationship with Kestrel Land Trust, which is based in Amherst. And they've had a fabulous donor who's been helping us with the search. And this has been going on for, a decade now. Actually, it's really hard to find land that meets all the requirements that one needs to create a conservation burial ground. We're still hoping it's possible. We haven't given up yet. And I noticed that this particular last chat that came in, it says like they have in Maine with a conservation cemetery. Yeah, Kennebec Land Trust up in Maine created a conservation cemetery. It was a sweet little cemetery, just an acre or two of a pine forest at the top of a hill with a lovely view. And they have just sold all the plots they're going to sell. So it's no longer open for sales. So if you're hoping to go there, I'm sorry.
Candace, will you be able to email us and you can just email to me? I can share what it involves for like a conservation organization, like what is the kind of requirements on them, because it's obviously something that's outside of their purview. And like you said, cemeteries are permanent and in perpetuity. So like what are they agreeing to if they, are considering something like this?
What would a conservation organization be agreeing to? Is that what you're saying, asking?
Yeah. Yeah, what are they on the hook for? What are they responsible for?
Yeah.
And then what particular parameters are you looking for on land for a
So
conservation cemetery?
yeah, I can share some of the details for our search out in the western part of the state. And I can tell you that a cemetery in Massachusetts, a new cemetery, has to be a 501c13 or associated with a religious institution in order to create a new cemetery in this state right now. And a cemetery has to be wholly owned. So let's say it's 100 acres. That 100 acres could have wetlands on it. It could have some special habitat on it. So the burials, most likely, they would definitely not be happening in a wetland, and there'd be a buffer zone around the wetland. So the conservation part of that would probably be some type of conservation restriction. And the conservation organization would look and maybe review your cemetery once a year to make sure you're not digging where you're not supposed to be digging, and maybe checking for the particular critter that might be, a special habitat for. And the cemetery would have to just be responsible for putting the bodies in the ground, maybe doing some trail maintenance, but the conservation entity may also be doing trail maintenance. So it's also possible that with every sale, the cemetery can say, would you like to make a donation to the land trust, the conservation entity? And they may or may not. In all other states in the United States, the cemetery would actually be able just to make that donation. If it, let's say the sale was for $1,000 and you wanted to give $100 of each sale to the conservation organization. In Massachusetts, we are not allowed to do that. We can ask the person to make a donation, but we have to show it as two separate transactions so that the person knows that they're actually making a donation as well as buying the burial rights in your cemetery. So it is a way for the land trust to get more exposure. And it really is their way of making sure that the parts of the land that need to be protected will be protected.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a little bit of interest in this conservation cemetery in this group here, but maybe we can, for the sake of time, we can reach out to you and get some more particulars about kind of your search in Western Mass, and whether you work with like a third party partner besides the land trust that would manage the cemetery and do the burials and kind of all the cemetery operations, so that doesn't fall onto the land trust.
Yeah, most land trusts don't want to do any type of cemetery operations. So Greenville, Massachusetts is prepared to act as the manager and operator of the cemetery aspect.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This has definitely been a huge learning curve for me. I hope all of you have learned a little bit more. Carol, do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I just wanted to thank them both. This was wonderful. It was just, I mean, so many questions answered, so much information, and a lot more work ahead for all of us to make this happen for West Newbury.
Um, yeah, and like I said, this is being recorded, so we'll be sending out the recording about a week or two, along with some of those resources that Marianne and Candace can send to us. Um, and if you want to continue this discussion, go ahead and email myself or Carol. We'll connect you to each other. It sounds like there is a good conversation that we started tonight that might continue afterwards, and sounds like a really beautiful process to be involved with. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Say good night.
Thank you so much, Marianne and Candace.
Yeah, thank you, Carol and Nancy. Really appreciate the opportunity.
And lots of great comments coming up from people in the chat too. So
Yeah,
much
Yes.
appreciation. Thank you.
Right.